Imagine a world where a handful of people own almost everything. The factories, the land, the money, the power. And now imagine millions of workers spending their entire lives in smoke-filled factories, working 14 to 16 hours a day, barely earning enough to survive. Children worked in dangerous conditions. Poor families lived in crowded streets. While industrialists became richer and richer, workers remained trapped in poverty. This was Europe during the Industrial Revolution. And from this unequal world emerged one of the most powerful and controversial ideas in human history: communism. In the 19th century, capitalism was rapidly transforming Europe. Factories were rising everywhere. Machines were replacing traditional labor. Economies were growing faster than ever before. But behind this progress was suffering. Workers had almost no rights. Wealth was concentrated in the hands of a tiny elite. This reality deeply disturbed a German philosopher named Karl Marx. Marx believed society was divided into classes. On one side were the bourgeoisie, the wealthy owners of industries and businesses. On the other side were the proletariat, the workers who sold their labor just to survive. According to Marx, the rich became richer by exploiting workers. Workers created products. Workers generated profits. Yet most of the wealth went to factory owners. Marx saw this as injustice built into the system itself. Together with Friedrich Engels, he developed a revolutionary idea: a society where wealth and resources would belong collectively to the people. A society without social classes. A society where no one would be extremely rich or desperately poor. In 1848, Marx and Engels published a small book that would later change world history: the Communist Manifesto. Its message was powerful and direct. Workers of the world, unite. At its core, communism aimed to eliminate class inequality. Marx believed history was shaped by class struggle. Kings versus peasants. Slave owners versus slaves. Rich versus poor. And eventually, he believed workers would rise against capitalism itself. According to communist theory, factories, land, and major industries should not belong to private individuals. Instead, they should belong to society collectively or be controlled by the state on behalf of the people. The goal was simple: no exploitation, no massive wealth gaps, no ruling elite. In an ideal communist society, everyone would work according to their ability and receive according to their needs. To many workers suffering under harsh industrial conditions, this idea sounded revolutionary. For the poor, communism represented hope. For decades, communism remained mostly an intellectual idea. Then came Russia. By the early 20th century, Russia was in crisis. The country was poor. Millions were starving. The monarchy was deeply unpopular. And World War I had devastated the nation. In 1917, revolution erupted. Led by Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks, revolutionaries overthrew the Russian Tsar. For the first time in history, a communist government took power. The Soviet Union was born. To supporters around the world, this was historic. Communism was no longer just theory. It had become reality. Lenin promised peace, bread, and equality. Land was redistributed. Industries were nationalized. The old aristocracy lost power. But building a communist state proved far more difficult than imagining one. After Lenin's death, Joseph Stalin rose to power. Under Stalin, the Soviet Union industrialized rapidly. Factories expanded. Massive infrastructure projects transformed the country. The USSR became a major world power. But this progress came at a terrible human cost. Stalin ruled with fear and absolute control. Political opponents disappeared. Millions were imprisoned in labor camps known as gulags. Freedom of speech was heavily restricted. The government controlled media, education, and public life. Many people around the world began asking a difficult question. Could equality exist without freedom? For critics, the Soviet Union had become a dictatorship. For supporters, it was a necessary sacrifice to defend the revolution. The debate would continue for decades. Despite controversy, communism continued spreading. In China, Mao Zedong led a communist revolution that transformed the country in 1949. Elsewhere, communist movements emerged in Cuba, Vietnam, Korea, and parts of Eastern Europe. For many colonized or poor nations, communism offered an alternative to Western capitalism and imperial influence. It promised land reform, worker rights, literacy, healthcare, and economic equality. And during the 20th century, nearly half the world came under communist influence. But with this expansion came a global rivalry that would shape modern history. After World War II, the world split into two powerful camps. On one side stood the United States and its capitalist allies. On the other stood the Soviet Union and communist states. This conflict became known as the Cold War. It was not fought mainly through direct battles. Instead, it became a struggle of ideologies. Capitalism versus communism, individual freedom versus collective control. Both sides competed in military power, science, technology, and global influence. The world witnessed nuclear arms races, espionage, propaganda, and proxy wars. At one point, humanity came dangerously close to nuclear conflict. Communism had become one of the defining forces of the modern era. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union faced serious problems. Economic growth slowed down. Corruption increased. Citizens became frustrated with shortages and lack of freedoms. Meanwhile, Western economies were advancing rapidly. Attempts at reform came too late. In 1991, the Soviet Union officially collapsed. For many people around the world, this marked the symbolic defeat of communism. The Cold War ended, and capitalism emerged as the dominant global system. But communism did not disappear completely. Countries like China, Cuba, Vietnam, and North Korea still maintain communist political structures in different forms. China, in particular, created a unique system, politically communist, yet economically market-driven. Even today, many debates surrounding communism remain alive. Supporters argue that capitalism still creates inequality, exploitation, and concentration of wealth. Critics argue that communist systems often suppress freedom and centralize too much power. And so, the debate continues. Communism began as a dream. A dream of equality. A dream without poverty or exploitation. For some, it inspired revolutions, resistance, and hope. For others, it became associated with authoritarianism, censorship, and fear. Few ideas in history have shaped the world as deeply as communism. It changed governments, started revolutions, divided nations, and transformed the lives of billions. Whether viewed as a vision of justice or a failed experiment, communism remains one of humanity's most influential political ideas. And even today, its story is far from over.